Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of Sovereign Love. I'm just very delighted and pleased today that to have my dear friend Kaliya Rivet join me this morning, or as I call him, Cal. Um, and Cal, welcome and thank you uh, for taking the time to be with me this morning. And I'm just certain that many people will be very interested in your spiritual journey, and I guess that's what I would like for to be our primary focus this morning. But I trust and look forward to even getting off on all sorts of theological bunny trails, and um, that's kind of what this is all about. And
Yeah, I was going to say that it's not easy to get me to talk about like autobiographical information
yeah,
for a long stretch. I'll probably end up trying to use that information to make some kind of philosophical or theological point
right,
and
that's
spend
fine.
spend 40 minutes on that. It's just not my wiring, for
Yeah,
whatever reason. Some people
yeah,
say they think in stories. Well, I think we all deeply, on the most fundamental level, probably do, but I
right.
tend to think more in arguments. So,
Yeah. Well, with that said, why don't you just, start from the beginning, more or less, and tell us about your life so far.
well, my unusual name is sort of reflective of my beginnings, and so now I'm already gonna be problematic and quote a late philosopher, Saul Kripke. He said that the essence of an individual is its origin. And you can sort of see my origin in my name,
Mm.
um, Kaliya Krishna Das. That's a Hare Krishna name for anyone who knows who the Hare Krishnas are. Let the let the viewer understand, um, or not. Maybe I have to explain myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Hare Krishnas. Well, see, I go on so many bunny trails.
It's
Severe
okay.
ADHD. The last name is Rivet. It's my father's name. My father is Quebecois. My father is from Quebec.
Mm.
I don't speak French. I'm in a profession where I'm a speech therapist. People have a hard time in my line of work with hard names, so I make my name as easy as possible. I'm Cal Rivet. Um, but growing up, I was Kaliya Rivet because my parents did not pronounce my name according to the correct Sanskrit pronunciation.
Right.
Um, uh, Hare Krishna is it's a form of Hinduism, actually a monotheistic form of Hinduism, which to some people is already a contradiction in terms. They can't
Mm.
understand it. But there are, at least you would say, monolatristic or henotheistic forms of Hinduism, meaning they acknowledge a pantheon of gods, but there is one supreme God over them who stands in the same relation to them as you might say Yahweh does to his angels.
Hmm.
Um, so in other words, it is the difference between the infinite and the finite, um,
Mm.
uh, sort of ontologically speaking. And now the thing is, in mainstream Hinduism, I guess you could say there's also the understanding of the Brahman, um, which is the absolute. But I think there was some debate in Hindu philosophy slash theology as to whether the Brahman bears description as, say, personal or impersonal, or whether it's beyond any such binary distinctions. And I think that there were a lot of philosophers who were, I see the thing is, I'm not enough of a scholar. I was going to say I'm not enough of a scholar. I'm not a scholar at all. But, I don't know enough to say if, to say how much influence those who had the more impersonalistic conception had in the interpretation of certain key uh, religious texts like the Bhagavad Gita, for example, which was sort of our Bible and is the
Mm.
book that Hare Krishnas will try to distribute to you on the street.
Really?
Um, um, you know, um, I don't know who was more influential in the understanding of those texts, because in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, um, Krishna is a sort of personification of the Brahman, but then there's debate over whether he's the personification essentially over something of something personal, or if that's just a category error because he's a personification of a personal thing. No, it's like no, the personal element is there in the personification kind of deal.
Right.
Or um, is um, is he a personification of something impersonal, or is it, the Brahman's beyond both personal and impersonal? But to sort of paraphrase David Bentley Hart a little bit, maybe whatever is beyond the binary of personal and impersonal is simply impersonal kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he likes Hart likes to say that whatever is beyond good and evil is only evil. So I'm just wondering, whether similar considerations arguably apply in sort of understanding of the Brahman. But anyway, there were people who thought, it's, like the Brahman is more personal, and some were thought it's less personal or it's more beyond that. And so the Hare Krishna is actually not really what it's called. It's Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Gaudiya Vaishnav Aparad, Gaudiya Mat, or whatever, Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya. These phrases come to my mind.
Mm.
Um, but it's an intellectual and religious tradition. It's really gets started in the 1600s under the charismatic leadership of someone who was also believed by his followers to be God incarnate, much like Jesus Christ,
Mm.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so the Hare Krishna movement that Abhay Charan Bhaktivedanta brought over in the 60s and 70s is the it is the um, it is it it is the Gaudiya Vaishnav philosophy and theology of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is also like it's like if you get into David Bentley Hart and his Vedantism, it is actually, I think, directly connected to the qualified non-dualism or the dual aspect monism, which is also personalistic, I think, not whatever these words ultimately end up meaning, of Ramanuja. And so there's a long history here. Hare Krishna, it's a cult. Well, kind of like, I mean, if it acts like a cult and it quacks like a cult, etc. But it's not a cult if you think that cults can't be old, because it's very old.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so it's monotheistic, personalistic Hinduism, where ordinarily Krishna is understood as an avatar of Vishnu, but these people almost see it the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
That God has many forms, but those forms stand in relation to Krishna, stand in the same relation to Krishna as do, say, a number of unlit candles, uh, which are subsequently all lit by one prior original candle that is always already lit.
Mm.
And so there is, you might say, no qualitative difference in essence, between the fire of one candle and another, yet there is some sort of difference of logical priority.
Mm.
Or ontological priority, aseity, in the language of Christian theology, or just theology.
Mm.
So yeah, that's the Hare Krishna. It's like Krishna is God. He's the supreme personality of God. It's imagine like oneness Pentecostalism or something, where it's like it's in the words of our friend Sam Adams, it's all God Jesus. It's all Vishnu Krishna, Krishna Vishnu, Krishna Brahman, or whatever. It's
Right.
and so it's essentially, it's deeply, as I said, personalistic. It's at least, you would say, it's monotheistic in the sense of acknowledging the primacy of this absolute personal God over, um, say, finite demigods,
Mm-hmm.
uh, who are actually created by Vishnu slash Krishna.
So,
And so the thing is, when you really shake it down and get down to it, it's the thing about it is that it's not so different from Christianity as the language, the superficial descriptions and appearances may
mm-hmm.
make it seem.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it reminds me very much of C.S. Lewis' statement that God, most likely, in his view, uses his secret influence to direct all believers or all followers of all religions at all times toward those elements of their theology that are most true. You see the people in the Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya, or it's a line of disciplic succession. So there are schools of thought that are started by guru slash leader people, and then they have disciples. These people are in the Brahmin caste. They're an intellectual caste. They don't do anything except that, they're the ones who in the old days, that days of the Indo-European Yamnaya chariot driving, cattle herding,
Mm-hmm.
kind of Central Asian days,
Mm-hmm.
uh, these
Yeah.
came down to India and also west to Europe. Hence the deep linguistic kinship between Sanskrit and all Indo-European languages.
Right.
All Indo-European languages.
Right.
Um, so these people, their task, their function was to placate the gods with sacrifice. They knew their history. They knew their philosophy. They knew their mythology, their cosmology.
Mm.
They they usually knew it and transmitted it orally, although it was also, written.
Right.
And they made the sacrifices. They kept the gods happy, but they also turned their minds toward the contemplation of very, very deep and difficult things having to do with the non-duality of any true monism, which is again why, David Bentley Hart finds such resonance between, say, Vedanta and Christianity, maybe a little bit even more so than I, but I've not thought about it as much as he has.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also in his sort of debates between the new Hegelians like Jordan Daniel Wood, I'm not so sure that I don't come down more on the side of Jordan Daniel Wood.
Mm.
But do I understand any of these things really? Does anyone? Probably not. Um, is there a deep, I would say, convergent validity between, say, Neoplatonism, Vedanta, Kabbalah, and classical Christian theism?
Mm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it looks to me.
Right.
Um, but so anyway, I was raised Hare Krishna. Those people were cult-ish, actually downright just
Mm. Yeah.
cults, full stop, in terms of their dynamics, the way things, in terms of their leaders, in terms of the shenanigans they got up to.
Mm.
Um, the whole generation before me at the Hare Krishna school that I went to, it's called the Gurukul. It's a school of the Guru. It's a Hare Krishna private school. The whole generation of kids before me, more or less, they were seriously sexually and physically abused,
Mm.
and they lived in that building. And it was a different. See, it was when I got in there, it was a whole different change of the guard. The head of the school was someone else. No one was living at that school. Uh, the head of the school was a woman named Jayanti. That's her Hare Krishna name. Um, she was a very, very she's a very strong-willed person. She Oh, I don't know if we're breaking up.
Not on my side.
Okay. She she's a very she ran things according to how she thought they should go.
Right.
That was, for the most part, pretty for lack of a better term, American way of doing things. Not to say that
Mm-hmm.
an un-American way or an Indian way is necessarily worse, But I'm
Right.
just saying that the way that she did it was not so different than what you would find at some other American school in some senses. Now it wasn't tremendously regimented the way that American public schools are, but I'm saying when I was there, I never saw anything at her school that stands out to me even in hindsight as concerning.
Mm-hmm.
But the generation before us, they were seriously damaged.
Mm.
Um, and I think there's a book called Monkey on a Stick that talks
Mm.
about all this kind of stuff. Because, or even if you listen to cult podcasts like I do, you get the fun episodes about like New Vrindavan, which was where, my goodness, was it Tennessee or someplace? And it was led by Kirtanananda. I don't remember his say real name,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Western name, legal name.
Right.
Uh, and and then on the West Coast, like his sort of partner in crime, Hamsa Duda, was like popped up on pain pills all the time, and he like did a drive-by shooting with a submachine gun or something.
Goodness.
Like, I mean, like we can look into these stories, and it's everything that cults do.
Yeah.
I think that Abhay Charan Bhaktivedanta, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, aka just Prabhupada, the master at whose feet sit all the other masters. Um, as far as I can tell, he was the real deal in terms of the sincerity of his religious convictions.
Yeah.
Um, I think that he was too laissez-faire, or maybe too old to even have a more hands-on approach with his underlings.
Right.
He gave tremendous power to people who were just psychopaths, narcissists,
Mm-hmm.
people who struggle with drug addiction, and but as far as I know, he was a sincere religious leader,
Yeah.
and and then a lot of the people under him, it's like some were really good, and then some, most I would say are just kind of there's sincerity, and then there's temptations to power, and it's they're
Yeah.
they're they're human beings kind of thing. But I think also that I would say that Prabhupada was probably a little bit too comfortable with like earthly or temporal laws, being broken.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's like got to break a few eggs. It's like
Yeah.
I don't really care how it gets done, just get it done. I
Right.
might look the other way kind of thing. I don't know. That's kind of the impression I get, but I don't
Mm.
necessarily want to speak ill of him.
Yeah.
He's my father's, or was my father's guru
Yeah.
or spiritual master.
Right.
Um, he's revered almost as a almost as God.
Mm.
But see, that's very tricky the way that
Yeah.
one talks about it because he's not understood to be God. But the guru is, I don't know, would you say in persona Dei? Like I'm trying
Mm.
to think of an analog to in persona Christi. He's there in the person of God, and you treat him actually as you would God. And the
Yeah.
idea that God can take a personal, or physical form is not unique to Christianity, although the insistence, say, the Mysterian insistence on Jesus Christ being fully human and fully God,
Mm-hmm.
um, is perhaps, I think, unique to Christianity
Right.
because Hare Krishnas would say, no, like he's more just like pure God.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
uh, but now as far as a figure like Prabhupada, fully human and fully God, it's not a totally inaccurate way
Mm.
of understanding how he's understood.
Right.
Although, I mean, you just it's a way, it's more like a representation thing. He
Right.
represents God.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, but he's not God. The way
Yeah.
that the way that a letter represents or a word represents something which the word itself is not. I
Yeah.
think that would be pretty good.
Right.
But
I
so
want to, can I interrupt you
yes,
just for a second?
please.
I would, no, no, I'm enjoying it. Honestly, it's very fascinating to me. Um, was a religious studies major, just so world religions in general are of interest to me. Um, but here's the question, loosely put in a way, as part of just the timeline that of your own journey in life. Of course, obviously, the mention of your parents both being in the Hare Krishna movement or religion or whatever you want to call it. I wanted to ask, um, and I know this might, I know this is going to prolong things, and that's fine. That's because I'm curious, and I think other people listening would be as well. Uh, because as you mentioned, I know you didn't mention where your mother originates from, but where your father does. But I'm kind of interested in how did they come how and this is as part of this the question that's kind of that I would love to hear your opinion of, because I'm not sure anybody can answer it with complete authority, is why the traction and attraction. When Hare Krishna was in a sense brought to America, uh, I don't know anything at all about the history of it, but most people, especially people my age, know about the Hare Krishnas at the airport, you know, singing, wearing their robes and singing and playing little cymbals, and that's about the extent of our knowledge. And so to me, what you said so far is, I think, very helpful. But yeah, I would like to know at least a little bit about your parents in terms of how they came to embrace Hare Krishna, and why do you think there was this traction or attraction to it in America or Canada?
That's good. I mean, the thing is, I'm really not the best person to do sociological and psychological analysis. There's just other
Sure.
people who just do it so much better than I do. Um, um, the my father told me his own story in very great detail.
Hmm.
My father was a hippie who became a Hare Krishna, I think, in his late teens,
Yeah.
quite early. My father was raised Catholic in Quebec, um, and he felt very dissatisfied with the 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 answers to his philosophical, theological, metaphysical questions, or the
Right.
lack thereof. Many times he wasn't given an answer, and at the same time, he started having dreams in which he at least believes or says that he and it's not that I disbelieve my own father, but I'm trying not to strain the credulity of
Sure.
your viewers too much.
Yeah.
But he talks of experiences with astral projection, um, uh, leaving his body as his physical body and entering into different like realms through his
Hmm.
subtle body,
Right.
and seeing um, texts, papyri, or uh, letters, in the Devanagari script, the Sanskrit script,
Hmm.
and that he believes that this sort of primed him for his eventual discovery of, the truth. Because my father is still a Hare Krishna, um, the um, he's kind of a schismatic Hare Krishna in certain ways that are like super super inside baseball, but
Yeah.
he's still a Hare Krishna. Um, and as far as my mother, my father had already been through one marriage that didn't work out. I don't think that was wholly his fault, but
Hmm.
that is another thing.
Right.
I don't think it was wholly not his fault either.
Hmm.
That was a very messy situation. Like my older brother, for example, my half brother Keshava really does not like my father. Um, I think his first wife has uh, sort of gotten beyond what happened, but I
Mm.
don't think that my brother Keshava has. And Keshava grew up with no father present.
Mm.
Again, I don't think that was actually entirely my father's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and again, it's a just a messy, complicated situation. But
Sure.
Keshava pretty much hates my father. But see,
Mm.
to me, my own father, like he was and is tremendous. Just one of the very, very, very best people that I've ever
Mm.
known.
Wow.
Um, and so it's very messy in a way.
Yeah.
Um, and so my father was a good deal older than my mother when they met. My mother is was born in Hawaii, is of Polynesian ancestry very distantly.
Mm.
Um, um, on her father's side, on her mother's side, mostly Portuguese.
So,
My mother's mother is a is Portuguese from the Azores. Um, like in term, but she was also born in Hawaii,
mm.
and her mother too, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But they were conscious of themselves as hailing from the Azores or the Azores,
Mm-hmm.
these islands that are way out west
Yeah.
um, of Portugal to out in the middle of the Atlantic. Um, and so mostly on my mother's side they were Portuguese, um, and I guess those people came over to work on the sugar cane plantations in whatever capacity. I think they may have been viewed as sort of they may have been given preferential treatment, racially speaking,
Right.
to the Chinese and the Japanese who had been brought over also to work the sugarcane fields. I
Mm.
I think the Portuguese there were more sort of middle managers, interpreters. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really quite even sure what I don't know what they did when they first got there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know my family's history that well.
Sure.
Um, uh, but you know, uh, certainly they were never wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the uh, my mother's mother is a really like strong kind of like Protestant, born again Christian. I'm not sure what her mother was. That's a good question. I don't think she was Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know the answer to that. I know my dad's dad was Catholic,
All right.
very, very strong Catholic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, um, so, so when my father and mother met, there was a very large age difference between them. Um, and and they met and married against my grandmother's wishes. And um, they were together for about 8 years, I want to say. And by the time that they divorced, they had moved to Texas,
Mm-hmm.
which is where I was primary, but I was also born in Hawaii.
So,
And but I grew up in Texas, uh, kind of near near where I'm near where I am right now, which is kind of East Dallas. So I grew up in East Dallas. Now I'm just east of Dallas, but
I see. Yeah.
um, yeah, so they were together for about 8 years, and I think in large measure because the age difference was so great, my mother just she couldn't stick around.
Mm.
Um, and I grew up with my father
I see.
mostly. I,
Mm-hmm.
I did see my mother often, but
Mm.
um, uh, I grew up with my father. And so I grew up Hare Krishna. Um,
Yeah.
and, in East Dallas, in a certain area that a lot of people in this area would know.
Mm.
But yeah, So that's basically,
So was it like a Hare Krishna community, and
yes.
did
Yeah,
people live?
everyone on the block and the surrounding blocks was
Oh, okay.
mostly, if not exclusively, Hare Krishna.
I see. Okay. So they didn't live in a commune per se or an ashram, but they lived.
They kind of did, but they had outside
Yeah.
jobs. Like my father
Yeah.
worked construction. My father did every aspect of construction,
I see.
including the things he probably wasn't strictly licensed to do. But the thing is, my father is, I mean, you talk about, like technical aptitude, that's just innate. That's,
Wow.
he's maybe you would almost say gifted,
Yeah.
um, uh, in terms of his ability to take things apart, put them back together, doesn't matter especially what it is,
Right.
and also to solve problems, to
Mm.
to 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 run operations, to manage logistics.
Huh.
Just a tremendous problem solver by
Yeah.
nature.
Wow.
Very, very disciplined, very, very self-controlled,
Mm.
very, very quiet, not given to not given to a lot of small talk or chit chat. Very
Right.
philosophical, actually,
Mm.
in terms of his outlook and temperament, but it's also very grounded. So he's actually a lot of interesting sort of paradoxes or tensions in my father.
Yeah.
So my father did construction basically. And then we eventually moved back to Hawaii when I was a teenager. And my father ended up, they pulled him. He worked temporarily on TV and movie sets as a stage carpenter because he can do everything. And
Mm.
they pulled him.
Yeah.
And so they drafted him into the union. And that was what he was doing at the end before he retired. He was on a number of different TV and movie shows. I
Mm.
think Lost, Hunger Games, at least part two.
Wow.
Um, Not Pirates of the Caribbean, but I'm trying to remember the other. Oh, Hawaii Five O, the remake.
Wow.
That
That's
was the
fascinating.
yeah, doing things like planting squibs, like explosive indoors to uh, simulate
Yeah.
gunshots through a
Right.
door. And
Wow.
if you're going to film on location at somebody's house, you can't use their real doors. But for continuity purposes, the door that you use instead has to look a lot like their real door.
Uh-huh.
And so my dad would be the person for that because
Huh.
in terms of just figuring situations out, it's like my dad is a very versatile
Mm.
person.
Wow.
Um, and so uh, that's what my father did when he was here,
Yeah.
construction and roofing and just every aspect of it, every part of it. And a
Yeah.
lot of, breathing dust and fiberglass,
Mm.
uh, it, measuring, knocking down. I mean, just I don't know. That's all the stuff that I remember. I did not work with him very much, almost
Mm.
never. I worked with
Huh.
our neighbor who had also been our neighbor in Hawaii, and then they were our neighbors in Texas,
Wow.
and their kids are like my own brothers.
Ah,
They're all still Hare Krishna, except maybe the daughter.
I see.
Um, and I would work with their dad sometimes, but for whatever reason, I never really worked with my own dad.
Hmm.
Um, my dad always told me that I wasn't going to do what he did, and he was right. I
Yeah.
never had any sort of aptitude or inclination to do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, when did you, if I understood you, you said you moved back to Hawaii when you in your teenage years. And so I guess you were still in a Hare Krishna school. And
No, I went to
oh, you
public
weren't.
school when we moved to
Okay.
Hawaii.
Yeah. So
There is
I
no
was
Hare
going to
Krishna
ask
school in Honolulu
as
or
best as
anywhere.
you can recall, when do you feel like you began to depart from the faith or question it or
My Hare Krishna beliefs were of the same fundamentalist kind that an evangelical, say, young earth creationist
Mhm.
Christian has. And so at that time, which was around 2006, the zeitgeist was very much with the new atheists.
Yeah.
Um, um, and as many people have noted, uh, I think David Bentley Hart and Jordan Peterson come to mind. But like you had the fundamentalist Christians, and they had a particular worldview, and that is to say, they believed a number of propositions. And then you have the new atheists who effectively, even though they believed the opposite, how to put it, they effectively, the new atheists fundamentally have the same worldview as the fundamentalist Christians, almost in virtue of the fact that they just went down the line on the same propositions and answered no.
All right.
But in terms of what the deep thing underlying both their worldviews, they both shared that,
Mm.
a kind of materialistic, um, scientistic, nominalistic, all these words
Mm-hmm.
come to mind
Mm-hmm.
that emphasize very much the particulars, and the philosophically speaking, you might say the ontological primacy of the space-time continuum and of particulars. And beyond this, there's nothing. There's no, say,
Mm-hmm.
Platonic universals. There's
Mm-hmm.
um, no wider reality. Like anyway. So I think that my beliefs were, and I mean, because no one taught me philosophy. I just absorbed the philosophical preconceptions, of my, philosophically illiterate culture. That was basically, it's, either, new atheist or you're, like fundamentalist. Of course, not really, but I mean, we're not, it's not so simple as that. But I mean, that was much of the zeitgeist, even maybe even now, but
Yeah.
it's changing a bit, but especially at that time, and so anyway, I'm just saying that, uh, for effectively the same reasons that a evangelical's faith may not survive collision with information about, say, the age of the Earth according to, uh, carbon dating or what have you,
Right.
or the age of the universe as measured by, redshift or radiation, background radiation.
Yeah.
Um, uh, my faith did not survive contact with just the public education system. Um, it's not as if anyone was really even shoving these theories down my throat.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I mean, and it's not as if I even read anything either.
Yeah.
Um, but the what I would do is I would go to bookstores or the library, pull out a book, just read a page or so and put it back. Um, I gained a lot of scattershot knowledge
Mm.
in that way about
Right.
many things. And in my way, I found the answers to the questions that it wasn't so easy to search things then as it is now.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually always have a phone or a computer, but I figured out what was going on in terms of the
Mm.
world outside the world that I had
Mm-hmm.
grown up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided that intellectually speaking, my faith didn't have a leg to stand on.
Mm.
The reason being, I felt that um, the burden of proof, not that I even necessarily knew that phrase, um, uh, the burden of proof was on the atheist. Excuse me, I didn't believe the burden of proof is on the atheist. A lot of believers seem to do that. And now I sort of almost agree with them.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, I thought the burden of proof is on the person's, I was with Richard Dawkins.
Mm-hmm.
I thought just like he did. He
Mm.
said where you both the skeptic and the believer can agree on the reality of the here and now, the physical world. But who is positing something extra? Whoever is needs to, you know, uh, shoulder the burden of proof.
Right.
Uh, Although the question is whether the more subtle and more discerning sort of David Bentley Hart type of question is whether one can even posit, a physical world without presupposing
Mm-hmm.
the the theistic ultimate reality, which all men speak of as God.
Yeah.
Um, the five ways and various sorts of insights, all very, very smart people from all times and in all places have seen and understood the deep connection between reality and mind, and
Mm.
have understood the perfect intelligibility, the relentless what's the word that I want? Unstuttering intelligibility
Mm.
of reality
Yeah.
as not just an argument for God, as if some remove existed between that intelligibility and God. It's just undeniable in your face. And again, evidence is even the wrong word. But you might say evidence for God.
Yeah.
And but I wasn't at that level of
Mm-hmm.
intellect. Um, I when I was 30, so only 2 years ago, I read and was really influenced by the work of an American autodidact philosopher named Christopher Langan. Um, uh, and you might say, awakened me from my dogmatic slumbers, the way that Kant said of David Hume.
Yeah.
But had it not been for my contact with someone who really laid it out in as powerful and and uh, explicit uh, a way, as he did, I don't know that I would believe in. It's hard to say. I
Sure.
guess I was on track to seeing the deeper
Yeah.
philosophical considerations that ultimately point very inescapably back to God. But when I was younger, I didn't have that
Right.
evidence.
Right. As a point of clarification, about the influences that, it's kind of the way I take it is it's just sort of your encounter with, in a way, a world other than the world that you had been brought up in, the collision of worlds and worldviews that are implicit in other people's lives and conversations and values and all of that. Uh, Obviously, that's very unsettling when it really happens in a kind of significant way. Um, uh, my question though was, would you say that it wasn't just the scattershot reading of things out of books sort of randomly? Was it particular authors like Dawkins or others that you would credit with in a very more clear and cognitive way of making you think differently and reevaluating?
Um, I didn't even read Dawkins. When I was older, I read
I say,
Hitchens and Harris,
okay,
and also a little bit of Dennett.
yeah, yeah,
What's interesting about that is, David Bentley Hart has very dismissive things to say about Daniel Dennett. And even when I was younger and I read him, it's like I hated him too. It's like there's some people that it's like
yeah,
even when I was an atheist, it's like I still hated them.
right,
And well, not hating, I'm not saying,
sure,
but like I just didn't see what was intellectually, say, compelling. Or
hmm,
I just felt like they were, well, really with Dennett, it's like he's really looking past and just almost deliberately not seeing
yeah,
very central issues, and that was true, not only in the whole God, no God debate, but also in
yeah,
sort of philosophy of mind.
mm,
And the hard problem of consciousness, people like David Chalmers, for example,
right,
there's something almost perverse in the way that Daniel Dennett would not even acknowledge would not acknowledge the existence of what might even be taken by some people to be problems.
right,
Um, and kind of the other person on the other side, the sort of like when how to put it, it's it's like there's the atheist that you couldn't even believe when you were an atheist, and when you're not an atheist, you're still not uh, relating to them, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's the other one where it's like the theist, William Lane Craig, whom you just love to hate as an atheist, and but still as the kind of theist that I am, it's like Craig is still wrong about everything.
Right.
It's like I went from believing Craig was wrong about everything to believing Craig is still wrong about everything. It's that kind of
Yeah.
thing. It's actually no disparagement against either of those men.
Sure.
They're brilliant. They're both much smarter than I am. And there's not to say that uh, everything they've done is without merit. Far from it, actually. I'm just saying when it comes to like this issue of being right or wrong on something really central that everyone's very invested in, one feels
Yeah.
that they just didn't, that their head wasn't in the game, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Mm. Yeah.
uh, but that I don't want to just trivialize or disparage them as in even as thinkers, let alone as people and image bearers of God. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you would say that there there wasn't necessarily any particular or decisive um, input from particular authors or podcasters or whatever. It was just maybe thoughts that preoccupied you, concerns that
I lost
emerged
my
over
faith
time.
in a matter of weeks or months when I
Uh-huh.
really started thinking about questions like where does life come from? Because again, where the way that I was brought up, the answer to evolution is that it's simply not real.
Hmm.
In other words, to say that it contains no truth is to set someone up on, because you make someone believe that, okay, you make someone think that the conditions for accepting or rejecting some proposition or worldview are different than they are.
Yeah.
You make them think that, well, no, it's almost like to say it's totally not true. If evolution is totally not true, it's almost to suggest that, well, but if it is true, then, say, God's existence is totally not true. You know what I mean? And that was the
Right.
whole false dichotomy of the
Right.
fundamentalist Christians versus new atheists kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying I was part of that. I fell victim to that false dichotomy. Um,
See.
and I did slowly become more philosophically sophisticated over time. But
Hmm.
that was a very kind of long process.
Sure.
And it wasn't helped by the fact that I just don't read. I don't read anyone.
Yeah.
Uh, or that's not true, but I don't read
Yeah.
very much.
Right.
And I don't read with very good comprehension.
But
Um,
you listen a lot.
that is true. That is true. I
Yeah.
also don't listen with very good comprehension.
Well, it's all that you say ADD, but it's all the creative and imaginative things that are just bursting in your mind, probably that you find it difficult at times to maybe follow a thread, or you know you're already having insights and ideas uh, that I think
Well, I
are
had a lot of anxiety and depression and still do.
hmm,
Uh, for fans of Jordan Peterson, not that say, David Bentley Hart is one.
right, right.
But uh, in terms of the big five personality model, I would just be sky high, really, really, really high openness, really, 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 really high neuroticism. That is to say, extremely unstable personality,
Hmm,
uh, or unstable emotions. Uh,
yeah.
and then, although these days that doesn't look like the volatility aspect of neuroticism so much as you might say withdrawal. But even then, it's a kind of emotional winter.
Hmm, hmm.
But I've adapted to the freezing cold, and I, do what I need to do. Um, And all the other stuff like conscientiousness or extroversion or agreeableness is like either average or low.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so, uh, but so in other words, was I like a super gifted creative kid? No, I was insane. I couldn't sit still. I was like Van Gogh or someone, except minus the creativity.
Huh.
So, yeah, I see a lot of. Oh, you're a fan of Monet,
Yeah.
and
And
I
Van
don't
Gogh.
know. I always mix up Monet and Manet, but
Yeah.
I see that I
Yeah.
see that kind of impressionist artwork in your
Hmm.
background
Hmm.
over there.
Yeah. Of course, that's Van Gogh back there, but
Oh, that's Van Gogh.
yeah.
That is Van
Yeah.
Gogh.
Beautiful. The irises.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah. Yeah. Um, well, um, so you made this this progression at least into you went from kind of an implicit atheism, I think, and it seemed to largely be, whether consciously or otherwise, largely be concerned with the issue of creation, evolution. Not that you necessarily framed it in those terms, but where did things come from and how did they get here? And therefore, at least implicitly, what is their meaning and purpose, if any? Um, but I've, I know you've mentioned before that you came to a place where you did, I don't know if it was in high school per se necessarily, but you came to a place where you consciously embraced atheism. Is that correct?
That is correct. In the sense that I wasn't one who said, well, I don't know if God exists.
Yeah.
Once I made up my mind, um, I said, I was again, I was like Dawkins. I said,
Hmm.
technically I cannot rule out his existence, but I can't do that for the tooth fairy either. But
Right.
in the meantime, there's a difference, say, between logical certainty, which is the kind of certainty where something could not conceivably be otherwise, and moral certainty, where no, you don't know it with logical certainty, and you can't absolutely rule it out, but you're certain enough that you're going to live um, uh, as though this thing were or were not true,
Right.
or is not true. Um, so I had moral certainty that God doesn't exist.
Mm.
And I was a new atheist in the sense that I thought other people should uh, think so too.
Yeah.
And
So were
as I
you
really
evangelistic about it?
as I sort of was, I mean, the thing is, I was argumentative in the way that I was and am argumentative, which is to say, not in a even then, I tried my best to give the devil his due, so to speak,
Hmm.
to steel man the other side. Um, and I did not find anyone.
Hmm.
I never found anyone who could uh, actually sort of, meet the challenges that I was posing. Here's an example. Let me see if I can dig it up. It'll
Hmm.
give you a flavor of the kind of I so here's an example. So you have the fine tuning of the constants, right? That argument.
Right.
It says that, what are the chances that our universe should be like this, life permitting? It's extremely improbable.
Right.
Therefore, God exists because you needed a designer to fine tune the constants. And so what I said in response is, take any other way it could have been. Take the universe that was just hydrogen atoms. Take the Big Bang that just kind of emerged, but then like sucked back into itself before any life could uh, flourish, whatever. Take the
Yeah.
universe in which no life flourishes anywhere. Again, this is very much from within this kind of materialistic worldview
Right.
where everything is just particles bumping around in space. Uh, Take any other way it could have been, but make sure it's specific. take the universe where it's just a bunch of hydrogen atoms or something. But again, they're moving in their very particular configuration that they actually do. What are the chances that it should exist? They're very, very improbable. You might even say ceteris paribus, all else equal. It's it's just as improbable as this universe is.
Right.
Um, is that an argument for how to put it? Let me try to back up and remember how I would go from here.
I just wanted to
If
mention I
if
will,
things if things if things were to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to mention I will occasionally go off video, but I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Well, let's say that we had the very specific lifeless universe um, that I'm talking about. Um, it would not imply the existence of any designer, even though it was improbable. Just because it's improbable, we don't feel tempted to invoke some designer and posit so the existence of something else. Um, so the reason why we feel tempted to do so in our case is that we assign value, a kind of objective value to human life. Um, in other words, we're saying that, see, here's the thing. So humankind, I would have said, views itself as valuable because of course it does.
Hmm.
But that we take ourselves to be valuable does not mean metaphysically that as a matter of fact, mind independent fact, there must be something out there um, uh, uh, to account for our actually insignificant existence any more than there would be in the case of the hydrogen atom universe.
Right.
That doesn't call out for something to account for its insignificant existence.
Yes.
Now, we think ourselves significant, but I'm saying, do you think that we're actually also significant from a more transcendent or objective vantage point? If so, and if you need that premise to make your argument work, you're smuggling in the conclusion.
Hmm.
That's what I would have said.
Yeah.
So you can see that I
Circular
was handy.
argument.
You can see that I was handy.
Yeah.
I wasn't a light. Well, I wasn't a heavyweight, but I wasn't a lightweight.
Right.
I was
Sure.
dangerous because I thought different. I made sort of sideways moves. As far as I know, no one's ever really said that. I never saw
Hmm.
Dawkins say that. I never saw
Hmm.
Hitchens or Harris or anyone say that. They do. I mean, I thought, still do think highly of Sam Harris, which makes me very, very popular. But I like him, and I think he's really smart. Um, but he says some goofy things like,
Yeah.
the multiverse means like there's infinite possibilities, and therefore every possibility that could be like is realized in some
Yeah.
way. But that just doesn't follow. If a set is infinite, doesn't mean that every conceivable thing is represented within the infinite
It's like
set.
a multi-universe in the machine. It's like invoking,
Yeah, it gets pretty nuts because
yeah,
the thing is really if you're gonna have it gets into the whole semantic thing, multiverse universe, like
right.
there should only be one universe. And even if you say
By
there's an
definition. Yeah.
infinity of worlds, there's a greater transfinity, if you like, of worlds that are excluded from existence just by virtue of the existence
Mm,
of this infinite series of worlds. And I was saying the infinite series, like so whole numbers or something, it's an infinite set, but not every number is in the set of whole numbers.
mm,
Um, so again, like I talked about Saul Kripke at the start.
yeah.
And Saul Kripke butted heads with David Lewis, the modal realist, who thought that all possible worlds are in some sense real. And Kripke said in his sort of uh, grading way, he said, if all possible worlds are real, what would God do to make one of them actual? Give it a kiss?
Yeah.
A little bit Wittgensteinian or analytic thing. You can't talk about wrong, then you can't talk about right. You can't talk about things not existing. You can't talk about things existing.
Yeah.
So the multiverse is kind of, it's just a weird pushing the argument back a
Mm-hmm.
stage, but actually not really doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
but I don't know if I was really seeing all that back then.
Right.
Um, but within the presuppositions that I had and my Christian debaters had, I could not find any really compelling evidence. Because you see, this is what I would have done. People would have gone 5 ways, fine-tuning the constants. I would have been like, whatever. You
Mm-hmm.
have to prove that God cares about us.
Mm-hmm.
You can say that something supernatural exists. The thing is to prove that that thing cares about
Mm-hmm.
you. You got to prove it. And
Mm-hmm.
what are you going to do? With your miracles or your book that is full of inaccuracies.
Right.
Like if you wanted to meet me, like I could meet people on that ground.
Sure.
And again, I would have given them a hard time because
Right.
it's hard ground to defend within that set of presuppositions where the book has to be like fundamentalistically inerrant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, you know, nothing Bart Ehrman says about it can possibly be true, even a little bit, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Like, um, that's just it's just hard ground.
Yeah.
So that's just why I was that way for a long time.
Right. Right. So, so what happened? I
What
mean,
happened? Yeah.
was it just a slow, gradual unease, a restlessness, or what?
Um, yeah. I think Jordan Peterson happened
Hmm.
where it's like there were a lot of us, for lack of a better term. In my case, this may actually be true though. Autistic, materialistic, young men especially, who have been raised by society to believe in all of these very shallow, essentially paradoxically metaphysical postulates, but it's
Hmm.
the metaphysics of no metaphysics.
Hmm.
But all these people who've been brought up with this very shallow physicalist, naturalist, isolated, analytic, what Luke Thompson calls divided man. Like, in academia, every discipline is siloized and set off from each other. Everything is like artificially divided.
Right.
Gone is the generalism of, say, the 19th century and before,
Hmm.
where, you know, thinkers in one area would weigh in on all areas.
Yeah.
It's an artificial division. And it's failing to see the greater transcendent unity that pervades everything. Where even what Ibn Arabi, maybe he didn't actually use this phrase, I don't know, but they call it wahdat al wujud. But it's the mystical unity of being.
Hmm.
And like we totally didn't see that,
Yeah.
and we were very underserved in a way by our society for that reason.
Hmm.
But on another level, it's like the darkness exists so that it can be filled by the light. And well, at least in any finite or temporal creation, there are going to be areas of darkness. The only question is where. But Jordan Peterson came along and said, look, this is what you were taught. I'm here to explain to you in terms that you can already understand and agree with on the same presuppositions that you share, that this leads to something transcendent and for lack of a better term, mythological.
Hmm.
You're actually in a mythological space, whether you can prove it or not, whether you realize it or not.
Right.
That's really what happened
Hmm.
to
So
Jordan Peterson.
I have to ask you, I mean, just maybe as best as you can recall, I mean, would you say that you were kind of experiencing a dissatisfaction with, with not with the intellectual place that you were at per se, but just with life, just the deep sort of existential angst over, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm asking the question very well,
Was
but
I a
like,
happy atheist?
why would you be drawn to Jordan Peterson, kind of thing?
I was not happy as a believer. I was
Hmm.
not happy as an atheist, but I always
Yes.
wanted God to exist.
Ah,
So that's another thing, because I
you
was I
you
was a
would not
pretty
would you have said that as an atheist though? Would you have said I
yes,
want God? Oh, you would. Okay.
yeah. That's actually what made me so dangerous.
Huh.
Um, sort of like
Please
like
prove
Yvonne.
God to me.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of like Yvonne and Alyosha,
Uh,
where Yvonne is kind of he's like he's dangerous because he does believe God exists.
uh,
Sort of like
wow.
I was, I wanted God to like in other words, I thought that would have been better because on one case you have eternal life and the other you don't.
Mm,
Also on a deep level, I understood, what Augustine meant when he said our hearts are restless till they rest
yeah.
in thee, that
Yes.
we are made for a relationship with God.
Mm,
And so certainly I felt that lack, but I was terribly, terribly unhappy even when I did believe just because I'm unhappy now. All the slings and arrows of of life,
yeah.
Um,
Sure.
but you have hope.
Yes.
But certainly as an atheist, I had no hope. I had no hope, and I was I was like an existentialist almost in the sense that what did they say? Like the the infinite has no meaning without an absolute vantage point.
Hmm.
Um, it's very much there.
Yeah.
Actually, to such an extent that um, especially in my early 20s, I was suffering from a very severe form of what you could call depersonalization and derealization, where I didn't feel like I had emotions. I couldn't feel them. And in
Mm.
the most extreme form of that illness, or at its highest level of severity, I mean, I I didn't even know that I didn't feel my emotions. It's like
Mm. Mm.
when you're dreaming, you don't know that you're dreaming
Right. Exactly.
because those parts, if it's unless it's a lucid dream, but otherwise, those
Mhm.
parts of your psyche which should tell you that whether you're awake or asleep are themselves asleep.
Right.
It was a very, very profound
Mm.
night. And it was definitely the sort of existential terminus of my philosophical trajectory
Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
atheist.
Yeah.
And it was on the other side of that Peterson made some kind of sense to me, in large measure because of what he said about um, uh, the necessity of recognizing one's own capacity for evil,
Hmm.
and about what bitterness and resentment can do to you,
Mm.
um, and how they can make you narcissistic and antisocial, which I
Yeah.
was beginning to be. But then again, it's like what I would almost say is I would to be if you're in that condition for many years, your thinking will eventually change. It's hard for it to not,
Mm.
and your personality will become sort of warped. Uh, someone someone once put it as they said, "My shadow is all of," and they talked about not loving their own family or their own children. And then you come to believe that you're someone who doesn't love their family or their children, things like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
I didn't have children at that age, but it's very subtle and very difficult to describe.
Mm.
Um, um, but it was I thought I was the only person who had it, but then I realized that John Stuart Mill had it, for example, and he was the first person that I read about who talked about having the same condition.
Mm.
I thought I had uniquely lost my humanity.
Wow.
Um, and but then I realized that the existential philosophers such as Camus and Sartre, whom I never really thought much of as a philosopher, not that I ever was or am, but I
Right.
was more analytic than say Continental.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I learned that they were dealing with a lot of that stuff, and that I wasn't alone, and specifically the people uh, in whose company I found myself were uh, mostly existentialist philosophers.
Mm.
Um, and
Yeah.
again, sort of like that. That's very much Jordan Peterson's. That was part of the message, at least back then. At least like 6 years or so ago.
Right.
Dostoevsky and existentialism and
Yeah.
all that stuff. It's pretty cool, but
So,
yeah.
so did this happen after college that you encountered Peterson
This actually happened during college because I
during?
went to college that late.
Huh. Do you recall, I'm just curious, do you recall how you happened upon or ever heard about Peterson? You
No,
know, well, I don't either, so I just know I did. Uh, yeah,
no, I
that's
know that um, his message took me by storm when I
mm,
found out what it was. When he was on with, because I was a pretty. That's the weird that they use like basic. Like I was a pretty basic guy in certain ways. I maybe still am.
mm,
Uh, like for example, David Bentley Hart keeps coming up so often as like this kind of like invisible critic, but like I really like Cormac McCarthy. He's my favorite writer.
yeah,
But
yeah,
uh, uh, it,
for good reason.
for the hearts of this world, that's a sign of questionable taste. And I did listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, and when Peterson was on with Rogan, I remember uh, it's like I couldn't sleep because there was just all these explosions going off in my mind
Right.
because I had really hit them. I mean, in terms of that depersonalization and the well, you see, it wasn't. I went to the bottom of something where it seemed like I could lose my humanity.
Mm,
But sort of like Camus said, it's like in the depths of like that darkest winter, I found within myself an invincible summer kind of thing.
mm,
I had an experience in my early 20s that it was like a there were several experiences like it, but there was one in particular that was like it was a very punctiliar just like experience where
right.
I realized that it was a realization, but it was also something external meeting me in a
Mm,
in a very confused and confusing way.
yeah.
Um, I I came to understand that I did not actually have a self or identity that was separate from the relationships that I was cutting myself off from.
Mm,
That there was a way that my entire being, my entire identity was constituted by the very relationships that I was um uh not not giving myself to. Um it's like truly, I mean, the way in which my life illustrated, various like philosophical, cultural, zeitgeist level contradictions and problems really satanic or diabolical
hmm
of you know false narratives sort of bumping up against the hard, you know, metaphysical truths
Yeah.
of, God's existence and the way that reality actually lays itself out. It's scary almost
Yeah.
because, really what I believe, and I had believed that since I was 17 years old. I believed that there would come a time when technological progress would would make human immortality feasible.
Mm,
And I was, as I sort of lost more and more of my humanity, I took it into my head to to just be a lawyer or whatever I could, the most lucrative profession I could think of for myself,
hmm
and uh, make as much money as possible so as to maximize my chances of partaking in that sort of godless afterlife, that
hmm
that secular, immortality
Yeah.
and eternity of the technological singularity.
Right.
So I really viewed it. It was very zero sum. It was very divided. I viewed myself as in competition, and that I, with other people, and it was very dark, almost in ways that I maybe shouldn't articulate. But
Mm,
it was very, very, very dark. And what I the realization that hit me on that snowy day, where I noticed everything was so quiet.
Mm,
And I thought, well, inside me is this it's the same kind of quiet.
mm,
Why is my heart racing? You know, and because I couldn't feel or acknowledge the existence of the things that were truly weighing on me. And then I realized, oh, it is that I have emotions, but I can't feel them.
mm.
Um, and and there was something like ice breaking at that time where I went into that frigid water that was, excruciating.
Wow. Yeah.
And and not really, but I'm saying like in my heart, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, and I was convicted of a profound guilt,
Mm,
um, but the thing is, the only thing that can convict you of that guilt is 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 the love of God when you glimpse it.
mm.
Like the prodigal son, for example. The reason why the prodigal son is so despairing, he's despairing unto death, is not because he's worried that if he goes back, he might not get his former lifestyle. He might not get the good material things back that he used to love. That's
Right.
not it. He condemns himself because he knows now how much his father loved him and how he needed that love.
Mm,
You can't feel that guilt until you know the love that that but the thing is, at that time I did not see it as God's love, but what I did and I didn't. I saw the way that because Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, your mind, love your neighbor as yourself. Somehow these are corollaries. Um,
yeah.
I I knew that I had no identity beyond the because here's the thing, I wanted to transcend my own humanity. I really thought, and even after I found out that that was philosophically not doable, like misguided, like it doesn't make sense,
Mm-hmm.
like in terms of like say persistence conditions of an identity which cannot be anything other than human. Even when I knew that, because I was so gone, my emotions were so absent. Those considerations couldn't sway me. I was already no one. You're
Mm-hmm.
telling me if I do this, I won't exist. I already don't exist.
Yeah.
It's like it was man, it was as a tangle, as a knot. It was very, very involved.
Mm.
Um, um, it was a lot like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. Um, but
I have to ask you, kind of to contextualize this sort of momentous silence that you experienced on that snowy day, and the guilt, a kind of a guilt in a way. It seems that you must have welcomed the sense of, because you must have, I don't know, the way I heard you was like you
the
felt.
way the way it was to me, was that you must abandon your humanity if you wish to have, because I believed in some kind of like radical self-interest, again, like Raskolnikov.
Yeah.
There were so many things pressing me into that,
Mm,
um, including my own bitterness and my resentment and the wounds that I carried from my failed relationships when I was more emotionally open. And the way it seemed to me was that one must abandon, as a matter of rationality, one's own humanity in order to have immortality.
mm,
Um, and then what I realized was that my my humanity, understood as the relationships, the web of relationships that was that I was not separable from, that humanity, that I I would die, that in my true self and who I really was, I would sooner die than betray
Mm.
then betrayed the the relationships.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm.
and yeah, so that was it's still difficult now, I
Oh,
guess.
yeah. Wow.
After it happened, I was like, this didn't happen.
Ah.
But I knew it happened.
Yeah.
Um, and it took a long time for that ice to thaw. It took
Mm.
many years for me to live into that
Yeah.
realization because as soon as it happened, it went away. The numbness was back.
Wow.
And that voice in my mind, which is sort of like the overlap between Satan's voice and just your own left hemisphere, which is too sure of itself,
Yeah.
that didn't happen. Or if it doesn't mean anything, you're dramatizing
Yeah.
something insignificant. It's all insignificant. What is this? You know, it's like
Mm.
it was very, very spiritual stuff, man.
Right.
It's crazy. It's almost too perfect. Like a novelist couldn't have thought it up. I can't believe that it happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it did happen.
Mm.
Um, that was the moment where Jesus says the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, so small.
Yes.
But that was the moment that
Mm. That seed was planted.
yeah that I believe it was Jesus. I believe
Mm.
it was
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome. I believe it was Jesus too. He is, he's just so much more than Christians think of him. His presence is pervading everything, he's filling everything in every way. And it's just wonderful.
I was not explicitly believing in God or Jesus after
Yeah,
that,
sure.
but I do believe it was Jesus. And sort of the way that was it Billy Graham? He tells us where Peter Hyatt said that Billy Graham said that he met a Buddhist monk, that he told him about Jesus. And that monk, he was getting super animated and excited as he was telling him about Jesus because he said there's always been this figure in my life that I've known in different ways
Mm,
all my life.
yeah.
And as Billy Graham was telling the monk about Jesus, the monk said, "This figure is telling me that's me. That's my name."
Huh.
And Billy Graham, apparently, he was like sort of embarrassed of that story because evangelically speaking, that's problematic. They're not
Right.
supposed to
Sure.
know. How can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard?
Exactly.
Um, how does one interpret that verse, by the way? One doesn't throw it away, but at the same time, one sees that Paul could have meant something deeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I really think he did. I mean, I think you
And
think
then
so
he goes
too.
on to say, but have they not heard?
Have they
And
not
that's
heard?
where he says,
Mm.
basically he compares it to the stars that day after day they pour forth speech without words. So yes, it's right there at Romans 10. It's right in the middle of, of the Calvinist dilemma. That's like, do you see this? I mean, I see it. I don't understand it either, but gosh, it's big. It's cosmic.
It
Um,
is.
yeah. So, was this when this happened? And I'm even questioning myself, maybe about even asking the question, why is this important? I mean, why is my question important? But were you already uh, was Peterson already an influence in your life at that time? This was before then.
I was very, very alone in those days.
Yeah.
You know, that um I had no influences. My soul did not commune
Yeah.
with anyone or
Yeah.
anything outside itself. Um,
And you mentioned there
yes,
were lots of broken relationships that kind of.
except yes and no.
Uh-huh.
And really it was not so bad as it may sound from that. I had not
Sure.
done anything
Yeah.
that was like evil or unforgivable, at least not yet.
Yeah.
Um, but I was very sensitive, and I had the kind of narcissistic injury, the bitterness and the resentment. And I say that my soul didn't commune with anything outside itself. That's like the line from Cormac McCarthy where talk, the kid is talking to the ex-priest,
Mm.
and he says, "You talk about a voice of God. I haven't heard it." The ex-priest says, "When the horses, when everyone's asleep, um, and the horses are chewing grass, something like that. They're
Yeah.
grazing. Who hears it? No one. And when the horses stop grazing, who hears it? Every man. Every man wakes up.
Huh.
And it's a when you stop hearing it, you'll know you heard it all your life.
Mm.
That's what it is. And the thing is, because I still did,
Mm.
even in the mode of not seeing him, I was still participating, still seeing. Gosh,
Yeah.
it's it's like because it's like God is not some object of vision that is either disclosed uh, or not disclosed by sight.
Mm.
God is the sight,
All right.
and so you know uh, uh, so yeah, that's what it was like. It was a profoundly spiritual experience, even if it was an experience of like no emotions and um, no
Mm.
no like spiritual connectedness.
All right.
And that's really why I am persuaded. Well, I mean, it's an illustration in my own life of the philosophical position that I hold, which is like the ethical intellectualism, uh, say of Socrates or David Bentley Hart again,
Mm.
that no one knowingly does evil, or the sense that even when you move away, your movement away from God is presupposing some deeper, more fundamental movement toward God.
Mm.
You can't you you can't move away from him even in your most conscious attempt to move away.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, but that was before Peterson, and that was why I did find him so compelling,
Yeah.
because I knew firsthand my own capacity for bitterness and resentment and
Right.
ultimately evil
Mm.
if I went down that road too
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
Because like mass shooters, I feel I can understand their psychology to an extent where
Mm.
they they in a society that is indifferent to them, they find an indictment of their self-worth or their value, um, as a person. They find an indictment of their identity in the society that doesn't think anything of them,
Mm.
one way or another. And so they want to inflict violence on that society that will demonstrate to the extent that that violence is 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 terrible. Um, it will demonstrate their, in the face of this uncomprehending, unseeing, indifferent evaluation of themselves, it will demonstrate and insist on their value
Mm.
as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it is from bitterness and resentment.
Right. Yeah. So, so we're at the stage where you are paying attention to Peterson's message. Um, were there other things happening at the same time that seem significant to you, apart from just what you're hearing and the impact that Peterson is having on your life, um, that are happening at that time? I know we're going to get to Christopher Langan, but and that could have been simultaneous. I don't know, but anyway.
No, because that big experience that I had was in my early 20s.
Right.
And I had read a book by Daniel Siegel called Mindsight, which was about meditation. It was about
Hmm.
conscious awareness. It was about the integration of one's psyche
Mm-hmm.
and all of its different modes, like say the left hemisphere, the right, the cerebral consciousness and the somatic consciousness. Um, uh, the heart and the head, so to speak, the body and the mind, and also one's past, one's understanding and interpretation of emotionally charged events, all these like
Mm-hmm.
a narrative or temporal level of one's identity and the integration of all these things that allows for a kind of, he called it transpiration, breathing across, which interestingly makes me
Oh,
think of Spirit of God moving over the face of the waters
right.
in Genesis.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was at that, that was sort of a powerful influence on me and still is. On some level, I think that's the name of the game, metaphysically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the integration of one's identity within this sort of continuum of identities in which God is the identity of the identity. It's like
Right.
it's what I saw in Langan too. It's
Mm.
interesting. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
panpsychic manifold.
Mm.
Everything is conscious in its way at its level
Yeah.
of scale or as the network that one delineates it as.
Right. Right.
I guess that was maybe sort of the beginnings of that metaphysics, but the thing is I was still a materialist until I was 28 or 29 or 30.
Mm.
And then because so it was when I was 30 that I read, or a little younger, that I read Langan and that he had such a influence on my thinking.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Showing the way that reality is mind. Um, um,
So if you had to sum up Langan, which I know is probably
Hard to
absolutely
do.
impossible, uh, but yeah,
I mean, it's hard to do it because I've tried on many occasions and spoken
sure.
on many occasions about it, and
Yeah.
one almost doesn't want to attempt it again because one
Right.
knows that one has said it better before. I have a sleep disorder, and so my wakefulness and my focus and my attention are always very spotty.
Sure. Yeah. I
Christopher
have one
Lincoln.
too, by the way. I got up at 2 o'clock last night. So,
Mm, yeah.
but anyway, yeah.
Um,
Proceed.
Chr-
I'm sorry.
oh no, that's fine. Uh, Christopher Langan, he's not an academic philosopher. He's self-taught. Um,
Hmm.
um, he was a bouncer, and now he's a horse rancher.
Wow.
He has lots of opinions that can only be described as far right.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of opinions that uh, are certainly um, disturbing, at least when you sort of map them in history to other people, who had similar opinions. I'm thinking of eugenics, or as he calls it, anti-dysgenics. Um, I don't want to. He's actually a person to whom I owe very, very much. I don't want to throw him under the bus or speak ill of him. Um,
Right.
um, and so I think it is possible to to have more charity toward him than one would say toward than one would have say toward Heidegger, who was an actual card-carrying Nazi, and yet we still don't entirely uh, uh, consign him to the memory hole,
Yeah.
where he's better left forgotten.
Right.
And I don't believe that in doing that to anyone. I don't believe God does either. I
Hmm.
think that that's
Amen.
universalism thing.
Right.
When I was so to speak at my own worst, that's not what God did to me.
Mm.
Um, but anyway, so I am. But the thing is, Langan, he's very cancelable. Like even he spoke with the the so-called analytic idealist, or he's an academic philosopher,
Mm-hmm.
Bernardo Kastrup.
Yeah.
And then once Kastrup found out who Langan is or learned more about him, he was like, he wouldn't even name him, but he said like, I totally regret having spoken with this individual. I have no association with him. I wish that the video could be deleted,
Really?
etc.
I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah. And so in other words, people have this reaction toward
Mm-hmm.
Langan. You know,
Yeah.
Hart is like um uh anathematizing Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to Jordan Peterson, I mean, compared to Christopher Langan, Jordan Peterson is like, I don't know, is completely innocuous.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Mm-hmm.
but as I said, and I will never say anything to the contrary. I owe this person a great debt.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because all my life I needed proof of God's existence. I wanted to believe, but I needed proof,
Yeah.
and He gave me that
Mm-hmm.
proof, and
Mm-hmm.
the in such a way that if I could choose to be as rich as Bezos, or if I could know um, what 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 he has shown me, I would always choose the latter.
Yeah.
It makes me richer than any billionaire. It's the whole
Yes.
thing that I needed my entire life. I didn't
Yeah.
want it to be some existential and shaky thing.
All right.
Um, and so he is a autodidact philosopher who came up with his own theory of everything, which is
Mm-hmm.
appropriately enough also a theory of itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
Yeah.
That's what he calls it. Um, um, Philosophically, one would put it in the tradition of idealism. Although there's this way that idealism becomes almost through a kind of Hegelian dialectical logic, it becomes something more than mental,
Mm.
because or not merely mental, because typically mind is understood in distinction to matter. If everything is mind, then what does mind mean? What is mind?
Mm.
And it's sort of going a level deeper. Langan is saying that reality bears description as a self-configuring, self-processing language, a language that is talking to itself about itself.
Mm.
And for that reason, it is a language, a self-configuring, self-processing language.
Mm.
Um, and he says that the universe is the mind of God, or excuse me, the universe is a this is a self-intelligible mind, basically,
Mm-hmm.
the self-consciousness. And God is the answer that we give to the question of whose mind, whose consciousness.
Yeah.
So it's deeply theistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would say almost Trinitarian too, in the sense of the language talking to itself about itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's its theory, universe, and model all at the
Yeah.
same time. What are the minimum requirements for reference? In the work of Charles Sanders Peirce, for example, you have
Mm-hmm.
icon, index, symbol. Three things: Peircean thirds. Triangle is the smallest shape that can fit into another shape,
Mm-hmm.
um, or
Yeah.
that can fit into all other shapes. It's a deeply Trinitarian um, element to it. Because why? Because this Trinity is the how is it? Look, in classical theism, they want to say God is simple, but he's also three. But what it's saying is that three is like sort of the minimum number of elements necessary for reference, which in its most primitive and fundamental form is self-reference. And that self-reference is the is the unitary aspect of it, which but see the sense in which God is simple, I think when you get into it is also sort of weirdly tortuous and dialectical, self-referential.
Mm.
So so that's what I was saying with Langan. It's idealism, but at the same time, it's like if we have mind, then is not mind understood in contradistinction to matter. So like now there's also matter. And so, but then, this thesis begets an antithesis, and then there's a synthesis, and then the whole thing repeats again and again. And that's sort of what philosophy has always been doing. So really, I would say like what Langen is saying it all is a deep interdependency between state and syntax, as he would call it, or just there's a deep way in which a pattern is informed by its instances, and vice versa, crucially vice versa. The mutual containment uh, uh, between patterns and their instances. In other words, it's like with this, with Trinitarian in Trinitarian terms, we say God he's the giver, he's the gift, and he's the recipient. The schoolmen used to debate what has primary reality. There was the nominalism universalism debate. What has primary reality? The patterns or their instances? I think if you start with the instances, they aren't anything under and below the patterns they instantiate. Even the criterion that we most often reach for as the criterion of numerical identity, a particular physical object being the particular physical object that it is, which criterion is its spatio-temporal history. So in other words, this phone is the only phone. There's no other phone that is this phone that satisfies the description of being this phone. Why? Because, and what does that mean? It means that because no two things can be in the same place at the same time, it means that only this phone has been in the places that it's been in at the times that it's been there. And so if we reach for this condition of this distinguishing condition of numerical identity, like that it should have the same spatio-temporal history, still we can view that as it's instantiating these high-level patterns, pattern of being at this time, the pattern of being at this place. There's more things have existed at this time and more things have existed at that place. So it's and Langen talks about that. He talks about constructive filtrative duality. It's like almost in color theory, you have lights that you're crossing each other with each other. And you're getting certain very specific shades at their intersection. It's Venn diagrams, it's set theory, it's classical predicate logic. It's a lot of things. And so I would say there's nothing under and below. No hexiety, say Pacey, someone like Duns Scotus. I don't think that there's like this brute thingness, that like this kind of absolute concrete particularity that is not reducible to higher level patterns. But at the same time, when it comes to the patterns can only be understood with respect to their instances. They have their being that is, if the instances reduce to the patterns reduce to the instances. They have no being over and above their instantiation. So it's like, if you, like when I was a child, you would have, 2 cups of water and I would try to pour the water back and forth without losing anything. I see this as the mutual containment of state and syntax as this kind of lossless transfer. So, you speak of God is love. God is love. Is it possible to speak of love only in the abstract? Or does one also need physical or concrete, terminal, specific instances of love? And so to say that God is love means he's love in the abstract, he's love in the particular, and he's the relationship between these two things. That is to say, again, it is Trinity. So that on the most fundamental level, you might understand Langen as talking about. I'd say that he's really just reducing it to this kind of state syntax interdependency, where hey, is God a creator without creatures? Is God a father without children?
Mm.
Um, and there's a way in which the pattern is defined by the instances, just as the instances are defined by the pattern, or the universal is defined by the particular, just as the particular is defined by the universal.
Right.
So it is getting again at this kind of non-dual thing, the non-duality of monism.
Mm.
Um, anyway, was that any kind of answer? Does that begin to make sense?
It does, as far as I can go with it. Yeah, there were sparks of insight as you were explaining it. I'm, you know, I'm sure that my mind is only touching the surface, if
Mine
that in
too.
places.
Mine
But
too. And when I listen to stuff, I just let it blow by me and
yeah,
let it stir up certain thoughts and feelings in myself.
right,
That's all. That's
right,
that's all I do as well.
yeah, yeah. There are definitely resonances with my own intuitions. Um, a couple of questions, well, maybe at least two, if not three, or beyond questions that came to mind as you were explaining. One is, and this can be a yes or no answer. It's up to you, but I wondered, is Langan, is, is is he does he in any way put forward his ideas self-consciously in a Trinitarian way? Okay. The other question,
I don't know. I can't. I can't.
yeah,
I can't. You might answer yes and no on that. I
yeah,
can't. I can't speak to. I
sure.
can't speak for him.
Well, I guess I'm sort of figuring, or I guess I'm to the level that I'm asking. You would be aware, I think, because you're familiar with him. And I'm not saying that he never sees any
He is
parallel.
comfortable describing it in
Uh,
Trinitarian terms, I think.
okay.
He's
And
he's comfortable describing it in many different religious
sure.
languages.
Yeah. The other would be is the logos. Does he even use that terminology?
I have seen him use it.
Uh, because especially early on in your explanation, some of the things you were saying was like that that is the logos. I mean, to me it is. Uh,
Yes. I don't think that he invented anything that wasn't already there.
right,
I think that he put it into language that I could understand.
right, right.
Um, although, of course, a lot of people will criticize him for not being easily understood and for using a lot of jargon and made up
Uh,
words. Uh, uh, well, on some level, that's any philosopher, though.
sure,
Um,
absolutely.
and but he, for whatever reason, I it made sense to me, and
Yeah.
it really put paid forever to the materialism that had been holding me back,
Hmm.
making me so miserable. Um, although, I mean, it's always more that one can say about that. It's a thing where that's really what my first experience of God was about. It was like the godless experience of God, where it's like, because if you did it, why? Just because God said, "Hey, I exist, and therefore do what I want," big cop in the sky, for metaphysical carrot or or else metaphysical stick.
All right.
Then it's not out of love anymore. It's self-interest. It's just,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense. But like the thing is that I needed it to be made clear. What
Yeah.
you couldn't give the utmost, you couldn't give all of yourself without the promise of some metaphysical afterlife. You couldn't
Mm.
give all of yourself in this life without that inducement.
Yeah.
Um, well, on some level, I think I did learn the answer to that, and I learned that I could.
Mm.
But it was a beautiful thing
Mm.
to see
Yeah.
when I could see it.
Right.
Um, the the radiant inescapability and omnipresence
Hmm.
of God,
Yeah.
and everything that that means. And well, and the thing is, certainly my own interpretation of Langen is different from Langen's interpretation of Langen in a way that maybe I'll get into. I
Um, so um, Langen provided kind of the evidence you needed to believe in God. Um, I don't know. It's like that. The word evidence just isn't enough. It doesn't sound like it wasn't like there was just a rational argument and you found it persuasive. There was something much deeper going on. It seems like there was a
yeah, well, and there's an Ian McEwan novel called Saturday
hmm,
where the protagonist talks about his feeling of losing a squash game to a better opponent and his sense of failure as being like as intimate and self-evident as the taste of your tongue in your mouth. Where sort of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him for any Muslim listeners, um, uh, say God is nearer to you than the vein in your neck.
hmm,
It's not just this eye is not only perceiving reality, it's touching the truth. It is the truth.
hmm,
Like the Tao, you can't know it, but you can be it.
yeah,
Um,
hmm,
so it is that. It's more like that.
right, yeah. What this just came to mind. What do you think? And I know it's probably way too difficult to explain, maybe, but what do you think that Langen apprehends and sees that the the new atheist could not or did not?
Oh, so it's what I said before about every very smart person in every time and place
Hmm.
has seen it, has seen in the perfect intelligibility of reality an unshakable argument, if one were needed, for not only a divine mover, but for a personal intelligence.
Hmm.
Um, and so he sees that.
Yeah.
And I mean, Langen, the other, I said he was a bouncer and a horse rancher. He
Right.
also, I think at one time held the Guinness Book of World Records, and I don't think anyone like holds it in place of him now. I just think that the title no longer exists.
Yeah.
But measuring IQ beyond 4 standard deviations above the mean is like really methodologically fraught.
Uh-huh.
Of course, you can also even question what utility IQ has as a measure of anything, like and whether it mismeasures people in certain key ways. I mean,
Hmm.
um, uh, I'm sympathetic to all that. I'm just saying, even if one understands, hey, let's just say one is all aboard the IQ train. One has to accept certain methodological limitations in the measurement of IQ beyond,
Right.
4 standard deviations above the mean, which is an IQ of 160. So beyond that, it's a lot of educated guesswork, and it's more art than science.
Yeah.
But based on whatever, technique exists in that domain, Langen has some claim to having the highest IQ ever measured. And
Hmm.
again, whatever it may mean, is measured IQ is somewhere between 190 and 215.
Wow.
So we're talking about someone who is one in a billion or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, this person is ridiculously smart.
Hmm.
There's simply no there's I mean, you can say like Luke Thompson, you can be right and be wrong, you can be smart but be dumb, you can be smart dumb, whatever. You can talk about that, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying that he's extremely intelligent, and I
Hmm.
think uh, he's. I mean, so I think that he has seen what all intelligent people have seen. I mean, very smart people. Um, uh, and then so he put it into words in his own way.
Right.
That for
Right.
me was very, very compelling.
Well, you've, I wish I could recall exactly the way you put it when you just 2 minutes ago, you started again to, you use a phrase in a sentence that just probably summarizes, but what I hear you kind of saying, and please tell me if I'm correct or not, is that it's like the atheist just doesn't see what's right in front of them and right inside of them. And
Mm.
they don't see their very eyes, which,
Mm.
I don't know. That's kind of
It's
what
like
I'm
a
hearing.
category error.
Yeah,
Can
yeah,
the eye see itself?
yeah, exactly. And so it's like there's just this immediacy of the truth that
Mm.
we swim in
Mm.
and we can't see it. Uh, is that, I don't know, is that a part of what you're saying that he sees and
Oh
gives
yes,
voice
I think
to?
that's I mean that's definitely a very valid way of putting it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that intuitively you you apprehend it, and maybe you always have. I think all of us always have, really,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
That's what Luke Thompson talks about, like the kind of divided man kind of
Mm.
thing, which is to be cut off from an intuition which you already have.
Mm.
That because that's the experience that I had, my come to Jesus moment, which wasn't a come to Jesus moment, but was
Yeah.
is I was just realizing what I already knew.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, that's why Peter Hyatt speaks so interestingly of the difference between, say, of Jesus and Jesus. That Jesus means God saves, and but what what we are inclined, you know, after the fashion of the flesh to believe is that we save ourselves. Effectively, we create ourselves, we justify ourselves. And when we're in that isolated standpoint, it's like all we can do is sin. But then again, it's only from that sort of unloving, unseeing standpoint that sin is truly condemnable and worth
Mm.
being. Uh, it's like from that standpoint, like that sin is so unforgivable that it just incurs the death penalty.
Mm.
But like from God's standpoint, the side that is not differentiating but is integrating,
All right.
it's holding together. It that sin um, is merely an impurity to be wiped away. It's the true glory of what is there can shine. It's an
All right.
irrelevance.
Yeah.
So like we talk about God's mercy as mercy, but really God's mercy isn't mercy. It's just
Mm.
love,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Yeah.
A parent is not having mercy on his child. The prodigal, the father was not having mercy on the prodigal son.
Mm.
He wasn't having mercy.
Mm.
It, it the thought of pronouncing the judgment as far as what the prodigal son thought it would be, that never entered the father's mind.
Yeah.
And the only reason the prodigal son could imagine that he might be cast out is that he still did not see from the standpoint that the father did. That is according to love, because like unless you love, you don't see.
All right. Yeah.
But
Mm.
yeah, so
So you came to a place in your journey where um, you could believe in God. Um, so the next question would be then, how did you move from being a theist to being a Christian?
it's a good question. Um, so the propositional way in, I mean the thing is, it ultimately doesn't rest on propositions. that's the easiest way I know how to
Mm-hmm.
talk about it
Mm-hmm.
and also to tell my story. But that's actually still not the story.
All right.
Um, uh, um, it has again to do with the interpretation of language. Backing up to what I said before, when I was an atheist, I would say, don't just give me your five ways or whatever. I don't care. You
All
got to
right.
show that that thing cares. Um, and is it if God doesn't care about you, but he exists, then it's functionally no different from atheism.
Mm-hmm.
You have no internal sense of responsibility to that God if he doesn't love you. And conversely, it's like what I was saying, like it's only in seeing that love that you can be convicted of guilt. And that's what I felt before. And so the business is whether uh, God actually cares about you.
Yeah.
And for me, the propositional way in it had to do with the interpretation of Langan. He does not seem to see or speak of God as love. So it's a difference of opinion already with the author of theory,
Mm-hmm.
um, which to some would seem like some kind of automatic proof of its invalidity. But the theory is supposedly formulated at a level of super tautological generality, meaning to say a level of generality where every component of the theory is a tautology.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is it's formulated at a very general level that allows for differences of interpretation at more specific levels. Now, I think that Langan would say that the difference in interpretation between me and him is not at such a or lower level or specific level. That, in other words, that his interpretation on the matters that I'm about to describe is sort of at that same level of like logical uh, infallibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so the thing is, if you have let's say you had some kind of panpsychic manifold, which is already it's a very interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Why should we assume or shouldn't, or why shouldn't we assume? Maybe it's better put um, that that phenomena or systems are conscious at the level that they exist at, and as the systems that they are delineated as. I mean, it's a wonderful question. From a purely physicalist frame, uh, it, it one wonders why only brains should be conscious. Um, Brains, admittedly, are a kind of computer, or could be seen rather reductively and misleadingly as a computer.
All right.
But then again, so can a rock and a tree. It's difficult to draw a distinction between systems which in principle should be conscious and those which should not.
Mm-hmm.
The implication that again spawned the whole hard problem of consciousness uh, uh, school of thought was that if rocks and trees aren't conscious, then this shouldn't be either. And but the of course the other answer to that is that if this is conscious, then everything else is too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, is it so as a matter of logical necessity? Is there a way in which, for anything to exist, it must participate in the reflexive, that is self-configuring, self-processing language that God is?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore that any awareness or consciousness is necessarily self-awareness and self-consciousness? Is there a level on which this is true as a matter of logical necessity? I tend to think that the answer is yes. Um, as far as arguments that can be given, I can only sort of wave my hands and speak about the difficulties in supposing again that this that this assemblage of fat and connective tissue and glia and sparks, so to speak,
Yeah.
uh, should be conscious, and yet this computer, which is sparks in silicon,
Mm.
should not be. And that if this computer is, then that the table on which it rests should not also be. Um, and uh, even Dennett, he did not find some kind of absolute dividing line. And that's the whole problem, is that consciousness seems to be binary, either present or absent.
Mm.
And yet the natural world does not deal in binaries. It deals in continua. So that to say the way in which a human consciousness is clearly different in terms of the functions that it involves, understood from a kind of mechanistic or computer science standpoint, clearly different from the consciousness of a mosquito. I mean, it's going to be a graduated continuum that spans both. There's not going to be this clear threshold point where it's like beyond which consciousness on, uh, before which consciousness off.
Mm.
It's a Sorites paradox. That is,
Mm.
at what point, if I pull enough hairs from my head, am I bald? Like,
Yeah.
what number hair would I have to pull?
Right.
Or, and so it's that kind of thing. Um, that strongly, uh, it's a strong intuition in favor of seeing everything as conscious in its way at its level, which would also seem to uh, imply the existence of a kind of universal consciousness, which is the consciousness of everything as everything.
Mm.
Um, and to sort of append a sixth way to Aquinas, this all men speak of as God.
Mm.
Um, uh, the but the thing is, if we have this consciousness, because here's the thing: the idea is like each neuron in your brain is conscious um, at its level in its way. But the thing is, there's a wider systemic consciousness that you sort of are identified with. Um, and the question is, uh, can't we draw larger networks in the air around our heads, so to speak? Can't we draw networks that, encompass the entire human race, for example?
Right.
Why wouldn't that be conscious? Um, and you can go on and on to everything that exists. Now, whether that exists as this kind of static assemblage that is set off against an absolute backdrop, or whether, to quote Hegel, uh, knowing a limit as a limit is already to be beyond the limit, and there is not some kind of generative component to, in this generative dimension to the problem of enumerating and encompassing all the things that exist. It's
Mm.
kind of like in a video game where you turn your head, the very act of turning your head in that direction causes some environment to render and exist. It's not that you'll ever run out of things to enumerate when you're trying to say, when you're trying to describe the set of all the things that exist.
Right.
Um, um, uh, anyway, that's why Langenthal says that ultimate reality is properly understood as the self of all sets, as the set of all sets, because in
Mm.
addition to all the things it contains itself. How do you do
Mm.
that? Well,
Mm.
I think he appeals to the mereology, the part whole science
Mm.
of consciousness, which has two dimensions of containment: a spatial one, or just more generally a state one, or an information one, and then a time dimension, or an information, or excuse me, a cognition dimension.
Yeah.
Benjamin is awake from his nap. So this is that consciousness is self-containing, and I think for Langen, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the universe contains itself in the way that consciousness does.
Yeah.
And it's what's I going to say? Oh, so the consciousness of everything. If one neuron is conscious, then this brain is conscious, and then the human race as a single organism, you might say, is conscious. Where
Mm.
does it stop?
Mm-hmm.
And if you had that consciousness, can that consciousness feel anything integratedly that its neurons or components are not also feeling separately?
Mm.
Is that logically possible?
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So like in Calvinism, um, you have this idea that God can take some number of his creatures, subject them to the worst fate imaginable, step back and not feel anything as a result of that, because he's
Right.
separate in his being from them, raising the question, if these creatures are over here and God's over there, what's spanning the gulf between creature and God? And is that more ultimate medium,
Yeah.
does that more ultimate medium not itself bear description as a truer conception of God? And that can anything be in God that God is not experiencing from a first person immanent point
Mm.
way?
Yeah.
And there's your argument for why, at least over some frame of time, God must care about you.
Mm.
But that does not begin to do justice or begin to describe, the love that God has, the love that God is, and also the transcendent. So what I've been taught, the transcendent nature of God. It's a way of understanding, you might say, his immanent nature, but God is not merely all the things that are. That you might say that is, I think that if there are things that are, then there are things that aren't.
Mm.
But keeping track of which is which is a very tricky and dynamic and moving target kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, but God is not merely like the totality of everything that is, um, or that is presently, say in God's time, which you might understand as something like the action of God's mind itself, rather than some like larger element in which God's mind happens to be suspended. Um, um, the well, see, now I just had a moment where just flew out of my head. That's what happens to me.
That's okay. Well, I'm wondering now this.
God's not. It's not just that here. It's like you just enumerate all the finite creatures that exist, and God is just the totality of that.
Right.
It's more than that,
Yeah.
because but I would say that is something like in Trinitarian terms, it's Christ. The it's another name for everything.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It's the manifest God.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have the infinite Father and say the finite Son, or if the infinite is not simply infinite, but is as a condition of being infinite, both infinite and finite,
Mm.
then it's the finite element in the interplay between the infinite and the finite, which interplay is sort of a third Trinitarian person
Yeah.
or element. Um, and so, but if you have that, that is not, because a lot of the time, see, my podcast is confusing. A lot of the time that I'm talking about God, I'm really just talking about that kind of manifest God, which is like the mind of the cosmos almost.
Mm-hmm.
But that, it doesn't seem to me as capable of just throwing some number of its creatures, even if it's only one, into the fire, and then stepping back as though it would not itself experience the resulting agony. So that begins on however shaky or firm a foundation to answer the question that I had, as the challenge that I would have put to myself as a young atheist. However, really, what I would say now, to an atheist is that um, I would ask if they could believe that uh, God may well exist, but that the way in which He chooses to reveal Himself is not is not a is not in any way where I can take the tokens of God's disclosure of Himself to me and then turn around and show them to other people in some way that's public and objective and intersubjectively verifiable.
Right.
It may be that God exists, but He does not choose to reveal Himself in that way. He chooses to reveal Himself in a way that is personal and most salient, primarily to you,
Yeah.
and most comprehensible primarily to you, and that to everyone else He has a different way of showing Himself.
Right. Right.
It's not a thing that, because if it were His own desire to make His existence some kind of fact that nobody could dispute any more than one could dispute that the sky is blue, He could have done so, but it
Mm-hmm.
may be at the risk of making Himself known only to His creatures as some big cop in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason for obeying or disobeying whom is self-interest. Um, uh, so I mean that's because from where I stand now, it's not the certainty uh, of God's existence to me is not it's not a matter of any one or of any one argument I could formulate or any set of arguments I could formulate.
Right.
Can never can never begin to formulate all the proofs, which is exactly everything that every believer said to me before when I challenged
them. Mm-hmm.
them. And so that answer is necessarily unsatisfying, but it's also the way it has to be. It's
Mm.
the way that God wants it to be.
All
So,
right. Mm. Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have a part two. I haven't even, I have no idea how long we've been going. I know it's been a couple of hours at least, maybe
yeah,
three. I'm not sure. But
yeah.
anyway, it's been delightful. And I really would like to follow up because I'd like to hear,
I think we said kind of all that there is, though.
well, what I would specifically like to hear, and I asked you this question and I just I wasn't satisfied with your answer, I guess you could say, was, what transition, in what way did you transition consciously or otherwise from being a believer in God, a theist, to being in some
Mm.
way a Christian? And I know that
The
that
God
to
is love,
me
the
is,
God is love part.
yeah, yeah.
But the thing is, nothing has occurred. Well, I don't know of any theological or philosophical knockdown argument to say that God must incarnate,
Mm, yeah.
as anyone, or specifically as Jesus of Nazareth,
Hmm.
in whatever sense can be made of an idea like incarnation, where the omnipresent uh, and formless and transcendent God becomes the someone localized and bounded. And
Hmm.
so for John Hick, for example, that made his little senses a square circle, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not aware of any like sort of logical considerations that require God to be incarnate
Yeah.
in this way. Um,
Hmm.
but um, when you say that God is love, to me, that is that is why I begin to see Jesus as His son, and sort of the ultimate moral example to follow, where ultimate reality is love. If ultimate reality, say, were something other than love, not that it could be, because only love has this integrative and non-dual and infinite nature, but if love, I mean, excuse me, if ultimate reality could, for example, be war, then maybe the ultimate moral example to follow would be Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan would be the son of God.
Right.
And so, um, but the relational and descending or kenotic nature of God as love leads me to Jesus in a way that stretches to the horizon of what I can consciously what I can consciously express or understand.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would like to explore that further. Anyway, we will put that off till later. Yeah, like I think about Jordan Daniel Wood and Maximus the Confessor, and God, Christ always in all things wanting to basically incarnate himself, and how I mean it just, to me, it raises a lot of questions, but it also offers, at least points us in directions of some answers, and some truth and reality, and that are wonderful, I think, beyond telling. But anyway, Cal, yeah, thank you. Thank you again for taking so much time. Thank your family for allowing you to take so much time. And I really, really enjoyed it. I was just telling my wife during our break, I said, I probably have the maybe the best and longest record of Cal's spiritual journey of anyone now. So I can boast in that, if nothing else. But no, it's always a pleasure to talk with you at any time, and even when we're recording it. And so thank you again. And let's do this again sometime before too long.
Well, thank you so much. I need to check out Jordan Daniel Wood and Maximus the Confessor. It seems to me like it's getting into the kind of infinite self-intelligibility of the logos. And thank you so much for because I mean, if someone's watching this video, they may not necessarily know that you and I do speak from time to time in real life, and that you've been just a tremendous influence, shoulder rock, in my life, someone I can speak to, and just thank you so much for talking to me today, but more importantly, just for being there for me.
Wow.
All the rest of the time. So
thank you. Thank you. I
thank you.
That. And you're just much more of a encouragement to me than you probably realize. So thank you, Cal. And I'll bid you good day, and hopefully we'll have another one before too long.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. God bless.
Okay. God bless.